and my next guest is here. I just heard him pop in. Patrick Henningsen. How you doing, man? You doing okay today?
Yeah, very well, Jamal. Very well. That was quick connection.
Yeah. Hey, well,
Straight in
Kit
there.
had just Kit had just finished, and so it was like I heard you just pop in immediately. I just bring you right on in.
Okay, great.
Patrick Henningsen. He is geopolitical analyst, journalist, host of the SundayWire.com, creator of 21st Century Wire, and critic of mainstream media's propaganda. I'm glad that you could join me, man. I don't know if you've
Great to
seen
be with
this.
you.
This came out, I think it was today, if I'm not mistaken. But they are now having this conversation about a new quote unquote peace plan. And so there are several things that are taking place at once. One, Zelensky is being effectively rolled with a corruption scandal by Naboo and Sapo. This is always fascinating to me because corruption is endemic in Ukraine. And yet Naboo and Sapo all of a sudden just popped into fruition in regard to like, hey, there's gambling here. We're going to now pay attention to the gambling that's taking place in this establishment that doesn't supposed to be here. And so they have been going after Zelensky's inner circle. And it is widely believed, and I have no reason to believe that they're wrong on this, that Zelensky is directly related and intimate to this particular scheme of $100 million. Let's be honest with you. Let's be honest, right? Ukraine has gotten billions. And you can imagine that a lot of that money has been embezzled elsewhere. And so $100 million seems like small change, but it seems to be the thing that has been circling Zelensky around the drain. I'll put it that way, where you have multiple articles saying Zelensky is out of touch. Zelensky is out of touch with reality. I think that was the Telegraph. They recently had their article coming out saying Zelensky is out of touch with reality. There's some articles coming out saying Zelensky should resign. There's the belief that Yermak is going to be dismissed within a day or so. We'll see if that takes place. And around all of this, you have the Trump administration coming up saying, by the way, we are now coming up with a new peace plan. And Politico has come out with an article. They said the White House wants to agree on a framework to document an end to the war with Ukraine and Russia by the end of November, or even the end of this week. This is what the newspaper is reporting. The quote 28-point peace plan that the United States and the Russia Special Representative Witkoff and Dmitriev discussed with the United States. Quote, it seems the plan will be presented to Zelensky as a fait accompli. And at a meeting in Kiev, unquote, the publication writes, the U.S. administration claims that they are, quote, on the verge of a serious breakthrough, unquote. Quote, what we are going to offer Ukraine is reasonable, unquote, says an official. Trump team believe that Zelensky, under pressure, will be forced to accept what is offered to him. And the last one, quote, as for the rest of Europe, we basically don't care about the Europeans, unquote, says the official. What do you make of this? I mean, because the reason why I put these two stories together is because there's a question of who was behind trying to get rid of Zelensky and whether that was the White House, considering the White House has been basically quiet as a church mouse as all of this has been unfolding. It is the belief that Naboo is a U.S. institution. And so if it's going after Zelensky, it is the United States that is effectively going after, trying to damage the credibility of Zelensky. Other people disbelieve that. I don't know. Give me your take on this. Do you take this quote unquote negotiation as being legitimate?
Let's just start with the negotiations and work our way back. The 28-point peace plan. Like, why stop at 28? Why not make it 30, 31, or maybe 38? Maybe make it 47. I don't know. Why not make it like 74 points or whatever? It's a joke. So this is the same type of the way the Trump administration do these so-called negotiations is they decide everything themselves in absentia of the other parties, and then they present it as a fait accompli. And if somebody doesn't like it or has any problems with it, then Trump will throw his hands up in true Israeli style and say it's a perfectly good deal, and they rejected it. So they're basically, the U.S. has basically become Israel in terms of its pattern of negotiations, which aren't real negotiations, and quite frankly, they're not serious. So what do I derive from this is that they're saying this now. They're in serious talks with Russia about bringing the conflict to an end. Well, they've been in serious talks with Russia at least 6 or 7 different junctures in the first year of this presidency, and
Yep.
it resulted in what? It has netted what? Nothing. And so I don't personally don't expect, and again, I'm a terrible interview subject for this because all the shows want to run with the headlines and say they finally done it. They finally done it. I don't think it's that Trump could flip flop by Monday, and then flip flop again the following Monday, and next month be in a wholly different place altogether, and then come back before Christmas and say they've got the deal to end all deals. So the problem is here, it's not just Trump. There's nothing that the U.S. can say or do short of an embargo for weapons and support for Ukraine that would prevent the Europeans, the British, or the Ukrainian hard right with Zelensky as their current puppet from basically thwarting everything or doing some gallant raid on Russian territory that kicks the can down the road until further in 2026 to buy time for the Europeans to steal the Russian assets, because that's the last pot of gold, basically. It's frozen Russian assets in Euroclear and in the various and sundry European central banks like France and a few others. 180 billion or in Belgium in the clearinghouse. They haven't been touched yet, although they're in the process of trying to collateralize them in order to raise money through various interest-bearing schemes, but they really want to just take it, because if they take the Russian assets, they'll use it for a couple. It'll last. Some of that money will keep the show going for at least a year, maybe a year and a half, maybe two. But the whole point, Europe's. I'll come back to Zelensky's corruption in a minute, but what you have to understand is that Brussels is coming up with a new scheme every month to basically sell this war. And you remember sort of 4 or 5 months ago, it was, oh, we've got this $800 billion plan to rebuild Europe's defenses, and Germany is going to be at the hub of this, and we're going to increase the budgets and budget deficits of the main European NATO states, and that's going to pay for this rearmament of Europe to confront Russia by the year 2028 or whatever it is. And so they ditched that because that was a non-starter, as I and others said at the time, because they're not going to be able to necessarily get the green light to go into budget deficit first and foremost, and let alone the procurement process and what's actually going to be done with that money, and when are the deliveries going to arrive of the weapons, and what's Ukraine going to get, what's Germany going to get, and so forth. All of those are open questions, just running in infinitum into the future. So that's not going to happen. But this latest one's called the SAFE instrument, SAFE, one of these. They're running out of acronyms, but it's a SAFE instrument. And this one is a beauty. This one's a beauty. This one is war bonds. So Brussels is going to issue war bonds, these interest-bearing instruments, and then they're going to use them to raise money, and they're going to take that money and they're going to loan it to the member states to buy weapons for themselves and Ukraine. So it's called the joint procurement system. And the whole thing is underwritten by the hope, the dream that Russia is going to pay war reparations when they lose. Believe it or not, that is the deal. That's everything's riding on that. So this is obviously thin ice. Okay, so that's why there is this gang rush to steal Russian assets. So when you see Macron doing these signing ceremonies with Zelensky for these arms deals, they're phantom arms deals. There's no arms, there's no money, there's no deal. All it is an MOU of a promise that they're going to be doing this and that and the other in the next 10 years. Zelensky's going to be long gone by then, one way or another. So all of this is just theater to keep this story going for European electorates. As far as the U.S. is concerned, Donald Trump has shown a proven record of caving and going back on every single statement that he's made since he's come in this term. And so if he says, I want peace, then the Europeans and the British come, or something happens, And if you go to Alaska to Anchorage, he says, yeah, we're on our way to getting a deal. And then all of a sudden he's talking about attacking Russia, and he is threatening Russia with this, that, and pledging more support for Ukraine. It just keeps going back and forth because Trump believes this is his negotiation tactic, is to keep upping the ante and being more aggressive. And somehow he's going to get concessions and negotiation concessions by doing that. And meanwhile, the U.S. top military brass, as well as the European brass and the British and so forth, believe that they can ride this out, and that they just need more time to prepare the next generation drone tech that they'll use to swarm Russia and basically paralyze their government in Moscow, possibly achieve regime change. And by doing this they'll win the war of attrition in terms of technological warfare. That is the absolute belief at the British level and at the European level. That's the absolute belief. They are 100% on board with this. But there's a few X factors that would cause this to collapse. One of them is the lack of mobilization of able-bodied males from Ukraine to fight in the interim. That's obviously something that's not going well for Ukraine. That's already hit the wall. If not, it's going to really slam into the wall soon. The other is the political time clock on Zelensky. That's another. And so now this corruption scandal is seeking to address that issue. The other is the political time clock in Europe, which is the European appetite for a proxy war against Russia in Ukraine. Now, the corruption scandal, as you rightly point out, Jamal, the fact that it's come out of Naboo. Naboo is not a U.S. agency. Naboo is a Ukrainian agency, but it's been micromanaged from its inception by the United States, by Victoria Nuland herself, out of the U.S. Embassy, as it was put together in late 2013 and was then formalized after the Maidan coup in February 2014. And the idea behind Naboo, and the only reason I understand this and know this is because we've done extensive reporting on Biden and Burisma corruption in Ukraine at 21st Century Wire, and we have probably one of the best archives on this topic. So I know that Naboo was set up, and the United States had implanted their key people, U.S. loyalists and operatives, and informants inside Naboo. The point of Naboo, SAPO is the Ukrainian anti-corruption agency that is ostensibly a part of the Ukrainian government. You could say under Ukrainian control, as it were. Naboo was designed, it's my opinion, and I'm not alone here, okay, that Naboo was designed as a corruption surveillance agency, because what the U.S. was concerned about was they wanted to know what corruption was going on and be able to head off any potential investigations into corruption investigations that might implicate U.S. friendly partners in Ukraine, specifically to do with Joe Biden and Hunter Biden, Burisma, and all that whole sort of cartel that was involved in that. So that the U.S. was, playing anti-corruption, but there's some corruption that they approve of, that they want to protect, and especially Zelensky, anything that touches Zelensky, and then there's corruption that they want to basically shut down. Now, the fact that it's coming out of Naboo means that the guardrails are off for Zelensky. That means that he has now been somewhat hung out to dry. It's a major warning shot to him that the protections aren't there. And that's understandable. I don't think this would have happened under a Biden presidency, personally. The fact that it's a Trump presidency means that they're a little less sort of diligent in protecting the trails of U.S.-linked corruption. That's linked to Poroshenko and linked to Zelensky and Amos Hochstein and the reverse gas scam and all of this stuff, Burisma, all of it, because that could have really damaged the Democratic Party and Biden while he was in office. Not really the case anymore. People just want to move on. So, but nonetheless, it's a wildly corrupt country, as you rightly pointed out. But that doesn't mean there aren't patriots in Ukraine that have been within the parliamentary structure. I'll name a few. Konstantin Kulik, Andrei Derkash, Alexander Dubinsky, all of which are either thrown in jail by Zelensky or have fled the country because of threats to their life. Okay, any actual anti-corruption deputies in parliament were chased out of the country or thrown in jail. So all of these people have raised all these issues, even the Privat Bank scandal, which Kolomoisky is the oligarch that heads back to Zelensky's career. He's currently in prison. I personally think he's also in prison as protection to protect him by being in prison. Personally, he could easily be in Israel and be absolutely fine and above the law. But so there are anti-corruption people who used to be in Ukraine, and it's no longer safe for them to be in Ukraine. And many of them have been whistleblowers externally. And so credit where credit's due. Trump dispatched Rudy Giuliani, who personally I can't stand for various reasons, specifically due his support for Israel is just and his disdain for Palestinians and Arabs is shocking. But he did really good depositions and investigations with Victor Shokin, who was from the head of the General Prosecution's Office during Trump's first term. Giuliani was dispatched on a fact-finding mission to Ukraine and came back with the receipts. Plus, we had the release tapes from Poroshenko's office. He recorded everything and left all the tapes in there when Zelensky came. And Yermak probably leaked some of these tapes or allowed them to leak out as a type of an insurance policy for him and the Zelensky government against the U.S. and Biden should they turn to stab Zelensky in the back and enact regime change. So those tapes implicating Biden, which they clearly did. Joe Biden should have been impeached just on the basis of those tapes. But anyway, he managed to ride off into the sunset. So now we have a situation where they need to, plans are afoot, at least British-led plans, to replace Zelensky with Valery Zaluzhny, the former head of the Ukrainian armed forces. And he's currently in London. He's released his memoirs. He's wearing a Savile Row suit. They've improved his English. They've turned him from a thug and into this debonair, statesman in waiting. But there's a snag to this. Okay, the snag is, the Ukrainian plot, the fake story of the Ukrainian divers who blew up the Nord Stream, all three Nord Stream pipelines from a 50-foot sailboat. That one. Okay. If the Europeans are running with that conspiracy theory, then there has to be a chain of command who gave the orders from the Ukrainian armed forces, and the head of the armed forces at that time was Valery Zaluzhny. So he has effectively diplomatic immunity. This is another reason why he was sent to London. You see how this puzzle fits together. So they're trying to patch up the Nord Stream story. Zaluzhny, while he probably may or may not have something to do with the deployment of these 5 or 6 Ukrainian so-called super soldiers who trained in a quarry in Western Ukraine, somehow managed to parlay that. I mean, it's a crazy story. But that red herring operation was assigned a budget, and they were sent off to create a distraction story. And somebody would have had knowledge of that, whether that was Budinov and the GRU or whatever, SBU. But Zaluzhny has been purposely put in the frame, you see. And this is the genius of this whole plot. And by doing that, they have motivated him to play this role, right? And to be the statesman in waiting, okay? And if he is parachuted into Kiev, he has double motivation to do what he's told. Otherwise, the Europeans could throw him under the bus and have him extradited to testify in Germany in the Nord Stream investigation. You see, that would be like the Hermann Goering kind of high-profile testimony, right? For Nord Stream, even though this Nord Stream plot is completely bogus and is clearly designed to distract away from NATO and Baltops 22, where the pipelines were prepped and detonated at the next NATO drill in September that year in 2022. So you can see all of this stuff is strung together, and all these points have to basically fire on the next one in order to make this work, because it's falling apart. It's falling apart from a military point of view. It's falling apart from a political point of view in Kiev and in Europe and in the US. And it's falling apart just on the sort of propaganda level as well. And the sort of the plot line is currently falling apart. So it's failing at all these levels. And the West, NATO, the US included, and the British and the Europeans have to all of these things have to sort of work out, because once one domino falls, the whole thing collapses. And I personally think Nord Stream is the Achilles heel. It's one of the big Achilles heels of the whole Ukraine story. And it really exposes a level of mendacity and hypocrisy between NATO members and the regime in Ukraine that is potentially would discredit this whole chapter of history. I mean, this is devastating for the West. So they have to keep all these fictions going. And the scary thing, Jamal, is that one of the big motivators on the West is they need to escalate. They need to escalate to keep the tensions high, to keep the fear high, and to make people choose between dealing with this new escalatory environment or looking back and plugging up some of these holes in the story, a la Nord Stream, or the installation of Zelensky and the undemocratic nature of his presidency, and also the collapse of Ukrainian conscription nationally. So this thing is really not going well for the West or for Ukraine, but it's even more dangerous now for the rest of the world, because they have no choice in order to save face and keep political legitimacy of so many regimes now that have sunken cost fallacy. They've sunken so much into this that they can't go back. You can see what the real European voice is here. It's Viktor Orban. It's Robert Fico. That's how most European countries should be speaking. They should be putting their hand up and speaking like these people are speaking. And these are the countries who are right on the border of Ukraine. And Romania, you would have had a different Kalin Georgiou would probably be president, and he would be right shoulder to shoulder with Orban, but the US and the Europeans intervened, and the French, to oust him from his ultimate presidential victory by meddling in the Romanian elections. I mean, that would have been the consensus of all European countries, aside from Poland, who border Ukraine, against the war, pro-negotiations, against escalation. So now it's a stalemate. You have Romania neutral-ish politically. You have Poland still pro-war, not from the population's point of view, but from the political leadership point of view. And then you have Hungary and Slovakia against the war. So, and that's what matters, are the EU members who share a border with Ukraine. Ultimately, it's their voice that matters, or at least it should matter, but it doesn't quite yet. The relationship between Orban and Trump potentially is important, but I think Orban has a closer relationship with Tucker Carlson than he probably does with the U.S. president. And so it may be not as important as it could be.
Yeah, I agree with you on the Trump thing. Trump can change his point of view in a heartbeat. I mean, apparently there was some kind of deal that they agreed upon in Alaska that Trump immediately backed away from, started screaming for a ceasefire again, started screaming about tomahawks, which, Lavrov still talks about the Alaska deal. And so I don't know. Who knows what Witkoff and Dmitriev are having a conversation about. It doesn't seem that Trump is able to accept a deal on Russian terms, considering the U.S. and NATO has lost this war, and they can't necessarily seem to accept it. The Nord Stream thing is interesting that you bring that up. Joe Biden, I remember when Joe Biden gave his speech, and he made that speech effectively saying, if Russia goes in, we're going to blow up the pipeline. And then the pipeline blows up, and immediately everybody is like, hey, we have no idea how this happened. And it's like, well, the president openly said that they were going to blow up the pipeline if the Russians go in.
And he did that in
You
front of
really think
Olaf
that you're
Scholz. Olaf
yes,
Scholz was standing right next to him
Olaf
and
Scholz.
didn't say a word.
Didn't
Didn't
say a
say.
word.
That was, to me, incredible.
You really think that that's the linchpin? That's the thing. That's the humiliating factor in all of this because they don't seem to care. The Europeans don't seem to care about Nord Stream being blown up.
Oh, they care. Oh, yeah, they definitely care. They care that it gets kicked down the road JFK style for
Yeah.
like the next 40 years. That they absolutely care. If the truth about Nord Stream is to be known, it is the biggest crime, the largest elephant in the room, possibly, is a huge multinational caper, a crime, and it delegitimizes the whole concept of NATO, the whole concept of collective defense. And then NATO itself is attacking European energy infrastructure,
Mm-hmm.
and then attempting to blame it on somebody else. I mean, it's insane. They first tried to blame it on the Russians, like that makes sense.
Yes, they did.
And then they've cleverly set up this red herring story with Ukraine. Okay, and which itself should disqualify European support for Ukraine. But because it's seen as something that's benefited Russia, it's been given a pass. But the Germans are dragging their heels on the investigation. They're trying to, extradite Ukrainians from Poland and Italy, who are supposedly key people in this plot. The Danish and the Swedes have the information, either to indict or exculpatory information, which they will not release to the public under national security reasons. Okay, because they had access to the blast sites. So the post-blast forensics are everything in this. And the United States have they also deployed post-blast, probably more like a mop-up operation. And there's evidence to that effect. So Germany could have rendered some kind of interim finding on Nord Stream a year and a half ago. But the whole point of this is to delay. They want to delay and to buy time to change facts on the ground in Ukraine, because that would change the political calculus vis-a-vis how the West feels about this war. And that's really important. The public opinion on this war is really important because that bears on the significance of Nord Stream, the urgency to find out the truth. Or, in the West, we prefer to brush things under the rug.
Yeah.
If there's other more important things to deal with, we say, oh, we don't need to go back in time. And the Nord Stream thing, oh, it's just it's a mess. We'll never know. We'll never know. It was probably the Ukrainians, and do that for 20 years. But it is important. Because it undercuts the whole legitimacy of NATO, collective defense. It really just destroys it. So, as far as the Trump peace plan goes, unless Witkoff has been dangled the rights to build hotel resorts along the Odessa beaches, that's the only thing that's been. And Kushner, and that's the only thing or a new Israeli homeland somewhere in Ukraine. That is the only thing that's going to secure cooperation between Russia and the United States at this point.
Who do you think is getting rid of Zelensky? You think it's the Brits that they're controlling Naboo, or do you think it's somebody else? You think
No,
it's the US
the U.S. have supervisory power over Naboo, and I believe they also had some funding power over Naboo. I'm not sure regarding USAID and how those funding streams are at the moment. I don't know. What I do know is that the British have been running point on the management of Zelensky. The management of Zelensky, the management of political narratives. These are British PR firms, okay, big ones. And so everything from the Bucha massacre to Zelensky's public optics, to his Western tours, to his wardrobe, to the photo shoots in Vogue, all of that is managed out of London. Okay. So is Zelensky. That Scott Ritter had reported, he did an excellent documentary series on Zelensky, that his close security protection are British.
Yeah.
They're British special forces. So that means they ultimately determine his fate, or whether he's going to be safe or not from his own Nazi Praetorian Guard. So the as far as the U.S. goes, so they have control over certain levers and things within Kiev, and the British have control. The British and the U.S. are basically working together, as well as the other NATO countries. But the British and the U.S. manage the important things, and the important things is the leadership and the sustainability of the government, the current government, whatever that government is. And if the U.S. and the British decide that they're going to remove Zelensky, then he will get his notice or not, and he's gone, and the replacement is already in the air, if not already in office by that point. And that'll be a smooth transition. And so I think that's it has nothing to do with what the Ukrainian people want. It's nothing to do with what the Ukraine. It's never been. The Ukrainian people have had no agency. They think they had agency when they elected Zelensky, who supposedly won on a 70% landslide, but that was because they had been propagandized in the previous, 5 years or whatever, of this actor playing the role of president, an anti-corruption president, on their TV as the #1 rated TV program that was force-fed into the minds of Ukrainians. That was a Western intelligence operation from the beginning. Arguably, maybe even Israel involved as well, Kolomoisky being Israeli. He bankrolled the whole thing. So, but that was to prepare the public to elect this comedian with no political experience by such a huge landslide. He would not have been elected to anything, not even dog catcher, had he not been a TV star and been a likable and been a comedian. So that was part of the process. So this, as you can see, this has been planned out meticulously for years. This war has been planned out for years. And it was only a question of when they would finally push Russia to the limit so that they would intervene. So I think it's considering the Minsk Accords and the UN Security Council 2202, you can't really call what Russia did an invasion or a full-scale invasion. It was a military intervention, and it was very much in line with UN Charter Article 1 and Article 51 for the Donbass republics, and also Article 1. Russia is merely assisting, and they could have done that at any point in the previous 8 years, considering the civilian casualties inflicted by the Ukrainian military. And if the West still maintain that these are Ukrainian territories, then they also then have to admit that the Ukrainian army that they were arming to NATO standard was using those militaries against their own people.
Yes.
You can't have it both ways. Yes. That's why legally, according to international law, those breakaway republics, Donetsk and Lugansk specifically, although Crimea, it's a separate case. It's actually even a more stronger case for independence, more legally and by the book. But Donetsk and Lugansk followed all of the stipulations under international law that any breakaway republic or autonomous region would have to follow in order to achieve the path to statehood. And one of the qualifications is you have to be under threat, military threat from your own government or your former government. And then your former government would have to cut off your access to the democratic process, the parliamentary process, which Kiev did through the lustration policies. Right. And then you would have to have discrimination based on ethnicity, language, or race, which, again, tick that box. So when you talk to international law scholars, as we do, we can see that the case for statehood from these republics is incredibly strong and robust, even though politically you can't say that in the West because people will start going into conniptions. But it's true. And so when they declared independence and then Russia recognized them for accession into the Russian Federation, well, that was all done legally and by the book. Now, you might not like it, Politically, it might hurt to say that, and you might say it's wrong, but it is by the book, and it is legal. So that's the whole point of this, is that they have a much stronger case than Kosovo or any of these other sort of Western fabricated constructs. When they broke up Yugoslavia by force, NATO did.
Mm-hmm.
They just used a different method with Ukraine, and it failed. And it backfired badly, and they didn't count on Russia moving so fast and so decisively. And Crimea is a whole different story. So, why am I laying all this out? Because this is a classic case of Western propaganda versus Eastern propaganda. Okay, propaganda is propaganda, whether you agree with it, whether it's truthful or whether it's a lie. But this is a battle of propaganda narratives. Okay, and unfortunately for the West, I think they've lost, because the Western propaganda narratives do not comport with their own international law and international institutions, namely the UN Charter, namely precedent case and international law. It just doesn't add up. So the West, in order to make this story work for Ukraine, they have to jettison all of the post-World War II international legal frameworks, norms, and expectations in terms of diplomacy and coming to a conflict resolution through diplomacy and negotiations, and not by war. So they've only managed to temporarily side skirt these obligations by doing it as a proxy war. But again, as we said from the beginning of the conversation, Jamal, the clock's running out on the proxy war. So they need to convert the proxy war into an actual war in order to keep the story going. This is the dangerous point that we find ourselves in right now.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that. So I think it was yesterday, and this is ironic considering they've spent months being bewildered by Nord Stream. But apparently there were 2 Ukrainians that tried to blow up a train, or they did blow up, I guess, railway tracks. And Germany immediately, or Poland immediately, pinned the blame on the Russians, obviously. False flags. This has been one of those things that has been in the air for a while. The mysterious drones that apparently Russia was supposedly flying all the way to Estonia. I don't know the battery power that they have on those drones, but okay, whatever. Are you concerned that there's going to be a false flag that is going to be used as an escalatory mechanism in order to try to escalate the war into another phase?
Well, I think that's what happened in Poland in the last 48 hours. I think there was a false flag attack. I mean, how would the Polish know the identities and know that they were fled to Belarus and all of this other stuff? So they didn't. When I first saw the report, when it first was reported, the entire Western media said, Russia's violated NATO Article 5, an attack on NATO soil, da, da, da.
Yes.
And then 2 hours later, Donald Tusk announces that, we have 2 suspects. They're Ukrainian. I assumed that they had 2 suspects in custody when I saw that. I even did a podcast right as that was breaking. I assumed they were in custody, but they weren't in custody. They didn't have them in custody. And so how can we trust the Polish government that they've ID'd the person, for one, 2, to then surmise that they're somehow working for Vladimir Putin, and 3, say that they fled to Belarus, so, and whether the people they've, said fled to Belarus from Poland are actually from, these Ukrainians. So there's no evidence to suggest any of this. We do know that a border dispute has been created between Poland and Belarus and Lithuania in the last 2 weeks. Okay. I know that personally because I was there, and I fell into that border dispute and was unable to return through Poland because of that.
Oh, that's what was going on. Okay.
Yeah. So, so I was attending a human rights conference and speaking on the Ukraine issue, and but so there's already an international incident that's taking place between the EU and Belarus. Belarus being bordering Ukraine as well as a frontline country on this war. So you have you have clearly a situation where who is motivated to do a false flag attack is what does Russia gain from blowing up a train track in Poland? What do they gain?
Nothing.
Nothing. They're winning on the battlefield decisively. They're rolling out a whole new class of drones that are apparently going to be a game changer, and new systems of electronic warfare that are 3 and 4 steps ahead of what NATO is providing Ukraine. So there's no benefit there. Russia warned about false flags in September. They made an official statement from the foreign ministry saying, we've intercepted intelligence about a series of false flags. And what happened after that announcement? The fake drone attack over the Polish border, that happened. We also had the Moldova drone, whatever you want to call it, fake casus belli situation, right after the Moldovan elections, coincidentally, or right around the same time as the Moldovan elections. I mean, if that's not shady, I don't know what is.
Mm-hmm.
And a number of these sort of potential false flag attacks. So Russia's already warned about it, and the West would say, "Oh, that's just Putin sowing confusion." You know, it's like, "Oh, but Putin is so brazen that he would warn about it and then he would do it himself." So between Putin's brazenness and Russian disinformation, like the West can explain away anything they're doing. Now, who has been caught doing false flags? Who has been caught doing these types of attacks? The Ukrainians have, time and time again, and asymmetric attacks and so forth. That's their MO. NATO's MO is NATO. All NATO has at this point, since they don't have any conventional military route to victory, they have Operation Gladio.
Mm-hmm.
They have a Gladio route to victory. They have false flags. They have staged provocations. And if you think about drone tech, endless potential for false flags. Endless. I mean, if you really wanted to ramp this up, you could just cause constant chaos, have the media dancing to your tune, and the public just be going crazy. I mean, you could just do this forever. And I think, I'm afraid to say, if we continue with the current political leadership, these type of spineless political hacks that are in all of these EU and European positions, if these type of people are allowed to be in charge, you're going to have a conveyor belt of staged provocations like this constantly to keep their military industrial complex and their defense stocks humming, to keep the tension high and keep us on war footing indefinitely. So, because there's clearly a motivation to do that in the West. If the West is not the one pushing to put Russia and Ukraine at the negotiation table, then they're the ones who are clearly seeking to benefit from an extension of the conflict. There's no debate about this. People need to stop guessing what's going on here. It's clear what's going on here. And the United States is, under the Trump administration, is doing exactly what Joe Biden did. Just Trump's being a little more coy about it. That's all. And giving the appearance of diplomacy with Moscow. And I honestly, I think Russia's just humoring them and going through the motions and continuing to pursue business as usual and to pursue their ground objectives as they have been doing for the last 3 years. And to them, they've already priced in Trump and all of the optics and the constant need for headlines and claims that they've achieved this or that or the other this week. The Russians have already priced that in. The joke's on Washington. Yeah. As far as Europe goes, it's dangerous because you have people in power in these European positions that are career bureaucrats. They themselves are, I think, a very mediocre caliber of individual, none of them with military experience. None of them have any clue as to what is involved in committing their young men and women to, combat major conflagration against a global power, a nuclear power like Russia. They have no idea. But they're all very, very okay and very enthusiastic about shoving the entire Ukrainian male population through their NATO meat grinder for what? To placate the collective vanity, you could say, of the European project. It really comes down to that at the end of the day. That's what it boils down to. The legitimacy of the European project, which is the EU and NATO. NATO and the EU have a running tandem at the moment. And the US is just sitting in the background and looking at ways which they can profit from this situation. But if you look back in history, Jamal, that's what the US has done in the First World War and the Second World War and the Cold War. And now they're doing it again. Same exact pattern. And Europe clearly has not learned their lesson of the last 125 years.
Patrick, you are fantastic. I swear to God, great breakdown, man. Thank you for this. Patrick Henningsen, he's a geopolitical analyst, journalist, host of the Sunday Wire, creator of 21st Century Wire, critic of mainstream media, and damn good analyst. Great breakdown, Patrick. Thank you, man.
Cheers, Jamal.
You be safe. Have a good one.
You too.
All right. Patrick is awesome. Great breakdown by Patrick. Great